Lesley Heller and look at a show by and hear an artist talk by John Torreano, and the title of the show is Dark Matters Without Time. John Torreano is probably one of the more unusual, more eccentric members of what was called the Pattern&Decorative movement in the late, mid-70s, late 70s, early 80s. And when I got to New York, he was a very influential artist. I believe this is the gentleman right here. We're going to take a look through some of the paintings a little later. I think John was one of the people like Thomas Lanigan Schmidt, Arch Conley, and Ned Smythe, who kind of pushed the decorative into the realm of kitsch, and have posed a lot of questions about good taste, excess, kind of over-the-top, exuberant decorativeness.
I'm Lesley, and this is the gallery's first show with John, and we're thrilled to be working with him and to be able to show all, especially the more recent work. As most of you know, many of you have been students, John spends part of the year in Abu Dhabi and part of the year in New York. And he's been doing this for about 7, I think, years now. So some of the more recent work has a little bit of influence from that experience. John has been exhibited at MoMA, the Whitney, the Corcoran, and the other museums. So it's really quite a pleasure to work with such an incredible artist, and I'm really looking forward to having him explain what goes on in his mind, which is an awful lot, while he is creating this work. So, welcome.
For this talk, I wanted to start with one of my earliest pieces. It's a performance piece. I call it Peekaboo. You've heard of it? It's had a huge influence. I like the idea of Peekaboo because it serves for me as a kind of template for the rest of my life as an artist, because it has a number of aspects to it that I like to have be a part of art. One of which is that it appeals to everybody. You can go to little kids in the rainforest, do a peekaboo with them, and they will giggle. And you can do the same thing on the streets of New York with little kids, and apparently you can do it with adults too. So what is it? It's an artwork because it's a disruption of the expectation of constancy. You expect this, you get this. And it probably goes back psychoanalytically to like the baby, the child waiting for her mom, and then, where is she, oh, there she is, and laugh. And so it's sort of like the same structure to a joke, right? You set up an expectation, you break that. And to a certain extent, I think that that's how art works, too. You expect certain things, and surprise, you get something different than you expected. Which brings me to the title of this show. I thought I'd start talking a little bit about the work, and you know, I brought all these notes. We're going to be here for a few hours. Really. Anyway, the title of the show is Dark Matters Without Time. And then for the talk, I put ... It started with a dot. I shouldn't have said the ... part. It's a little redundant. But anyway, so what does it mean, dark matters without time? A couple of things. First of all, dark matters can be a thing. In fact, it is a thing. It's dark matter, and I just put it into the plural for the fun of it. And what I like about the idea of dark matter is they know it's there, but they don't really know what it is. And in a sense, that's how I feel the process of approaching art works. You know it's there potentially, and you seek it, and you try to come to some resolution to this mystery. So it has these combinations of knowingness and mystery, and that's what I like about art, right? The other meaning about it is that dark matters, there are dark matters. So, you know, especially today, we're sort of working on one of those dark matters with the parade today. It's not a parade, it's a march. Do you actually have to like march? I get confused with these things. You know, there's like hiking and there's marching, and you know, can you walk during a hike, or do you have to, you know, hike? Can you hike on a walk if you want? Anyway, so dark matters, and I use the imagery. This is interesting because this is where some aspects of science and art overlap. They actually have images of dark matter on the Hubble Space Gallery, right? They're making that up. You know, that's them being artists, in my opinion. And they're beautiful in a way, and for me, they're a perfect resource for imagery because they're already a painting. They're sort of like a surrealistic, biomorphic. They reference biomorphism, and they usually put them in either blue and black tones or red and black tones. And so I've used them to actually respond to, for drawing and painting, because they do everything I need from a subject. One, they provide some specificity and particularity of shape and character, and if I choose to, I can pick the colors. They do that. So the other thing they do is they're already abstract. So I get to continue working within the framework of abstraction and at the same time have some kind of particularity of response. For a long time I've been working with imagery having to do with outer space. Some of these have nebula. This one is called, like, I think, swimming in nebulae. And I think this one is SWC in Dorados. SWC stands for Swimming with Cezanne. And we're swimming through this spatial event, which is an area in outer space referred to as Dorados, where stars get born. So it's kind of like a little kinky. Stars are being born. It's like we're in the womb of outer space to a certain extent. But the reference to Cézanne is that, you know, I have an idea about some of these, for example, have to do with what I call impossible collisions. And an impossible collision is a combination of things that are either theoretical or visual or a whole number of qualities that are coming at us all the time. So I think about Cézanne, I think about Dorados, I think about outer space. You know, you have Cézanne. And so I would put them together, I would collapse them together in order to force myself to push painting and to invent resolutions to impossible collisions of ideas. And so in our time, you know, in my time, and you know, ever since the Enlightenment really, the fracturing of our experiences in life has gone to the umpteenth power. You know, I mean, if Cubism, actually Cézanne was the first one to really perceive it in a quasi-conscious cortical level, you know, beyond the Impressionists. And he was breaking up, he was seeing the broken up patterns of perception at a cortical level. And in a way, Cubism was really, in my opinion, it was Picasso and Braque kind of studying Cézanne and making a hard edge and saying, well, it's cubes and stuff. Anyway, this idea of impossible collisions is me, I will, in order to push painting and resolutions in painting, I will draw and paint some dark matter imagery. And then right on top of that, I might put, I might have a Cézanne that I'm looking at and draw some of the Cézanne as if what I just did not exist, right? And then there might be a third or fourth layer. So eventually you have a chaotic environment, not unlike the way we feel today, right? We live in an internally chaotic environment where contradictory phenomena of thought and perception are clashing together. So the challenge then, and what I like about this, the challenge is what can I do to actually integrate this or to actually make it work? So I purposely do these impossible collisions in an effort to force myself to invent new resolutions to problems in painting. So in a way, I'm expressing right now a philosophy about painting that's continued from the concept of modernism. I am an old school modernist in that sense. And you know, what does that mean? Well, let me see, I was going to say how I got started beyond, you know, the earliest work. I was born in August 1941, and the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in December 7th, so how's the guy supposed to take that? Anyway, so my childhood had a lot to do with being conscious of this horrible thing going on, because I had a father gone, I had several uncles gone and fighting in Germany and in Italy. By the way, if they ever heard about any neo-Nazis, they would go find them and beat the shit out of them. This is ridiculous. How can they be that way? You know, that's it. Today. My first drawings were little wars. You know, I would make hills and tanks on them, and then make little airplanes and guys with automatic weapons down in dugouts. And then I would have a battle, and I would make the sound like that, right? And I'd have the explosion. I would make these little dots like that, and I'd fill those in and color them in. So as you can see, when I discovered that I could actually be an artist, it was when I had my first art class. It was 1959. Luckily, I had a really good teacher and a really good artist, a guy named Richard DeVore. Have you heard of him? He would, because he went to Cranbrook Academy of Art as well. Anyway, Richard DeVore was one of the few crossover ceramics artists. Eventually, he showed at Max Protech and other galleries, but he was my first teacher. And they all the teachers at Flint Community Junior College had gone to Cranbrook, so they all had this kind of, they were artists, you know. And, and this was right still in the middle of abstract expressionism, so of course, the combination of my early training and my adolescent rebellious nature, I took to it like a fish to water, right? So abstract expressionism, me, modernism, and everything all came together there. And where I came from, there wasn't any such thing as art. You know, there were guys that liked to draw, like me and stuff. But the idea that you could actually be one. So I had like an epiphany. I went like, you mean you can do this? And that was it. I decided right then and there, that's what I was going to do. So I went from a crappy 2-point average to a 3-point or 4-point average because I found, and I never looked back there. In addition to embracing early on the abstract expressionist and the concept of abstraction, there was the assumption of modernism in there at that time. We weren't at postmodern yet. So and to this day, I still adhere to some of the characteristics of it, which would be things like the utopian idealism of modernism, that things could get better, that people could become more unified, that the classes would kind of like smoosh together and the world would become more democratic. Of course, we see what happened with that. Well, I don't want to be equal. I want to be more than equal. You know, Tocqueville, the French social critic of America, he said that the dilemma of America was the conflict between democracy and individualism. You know, everybody wanted to be both. I want freedom of everybody being equal, but I want to be more equal. So that's why we have you know, a loss, a tremendous sense of, I'm really wandering around here too much. You can pull me in. A sense of loss happened with this idea of everybody being equal. So everybody now wants to be unique. I mean, initially, in the 30s and 40s, the immigrants that came here, they wanted to assimilate and join this positive effort at becoming, you know, a unified world. And so they tended to discard their identities, you know, stop speaking their particular languages and knock off the hairy ends of their names, you know. Bob Ross, you know, instead of Rossini or something, you know, or Czech, Bill Czech instead of Czechowitz and things like that. So that was the assimilation period. People wanted to get rid of those things so they could be part of America, which was a new, hopeful, positive idea. Now everybody wants those things back, right? So, anyway, where was I on this? Modernism. Oh, along with modernism was the appeal of abstraction, because abstraction represented a universal language that didn't carry with it the load of identifiable cultural particularities, right? So you could be a Japanese artist, and with abstraction you could be communicating in a sense with the world in the same way that a South American artist could, or an American artist could. So that was the utopian idea behind abstraction. So I liked that too, and I've still maintained a kind of commitment to abstraction and also a commitment to the idea of a global point of view. In fact, that's one of the reasons I was attracted to teaching in Abu Dhabi, because their mission is to be the global university in the world, and they've done a pretty good job so far. They have a very aggressive admissions policy. They go all over the world. You get people from every place in the world in your class, and it's only 15 people, and it's a very modern idea that they're continuing. And I have a feeling the reason that happened is because John Sexton, who was the head of the university at the time, was raised by taught by Jesuits. So it's a very Catholic idea too. Anyway, I digressed again. Sorry. Abstraction and the language, the universal language of painting. I've always, along with joining the kind of anti-conventional, non-conformist aspect of abstract expressionism, it suited me perfectly well because I was an oddball right from the beginning. One of my mom's memories, maybe it was one of my second major performance pieces, I used to have this habit of tying my fingers up like this, and I could like twist, and they'd be all flattened out. And then I had this thing where I could put my ears in like that, and I would stay in. And then so what she describes is one day I'm walking behind her in the supermarket, and I have my hands all crippled like this. My ears are sticking in, and my eyes are crossed. And that's just me doing my thing. And she turns around and says, "Stop it! How could she be that way? She's so embarrassed about his deformity." Anyway, so you can see I started with a certain amount of weirdness and non-conformity, and as I evolved as an artist, I just naturally resisted certain ideas that I had been not told, but were in the air, let's say. And one of them was, that went along with modernism, was this idea of, in fact it was developed by Greenberg, the critic. What's his first name? Bill Greenberg?
Clement, yeah.
What?
Clement.
Yeah, right. Anyway, his argument for how art should be formalized is that because of photography's ability to do such great representational work, that meant the other art forms, such as sculpture and painting and so on, had to strive to be essentially what they could be. So it's like the essentialist philosophy, and what that meant was, a painter had to make paintings that only do things that only painting could do, without the representational part, because that was photography's job. And so it had to be essentially flat, it had to be about paint, and so on. And I hated that idea. And I started to do things when I first came to New York, where I was doing highly illusionistic things along with flatness, where I would bend space with different tools of perception that I had developed when I went to Ohio State. Anyway, among the tools were traditional painterly tools, such as painting thick over thin, stimulates a brightness contrast, which is a device for creating illusion. Dots that I would put in as well, that with different sizes would do the same thing, create a floating sense of space. And then I even had I used some curved, some giant French curves I made, so that I could make shapes that would bulge out. So the painting was both three-dimensionally illusionistic and flat at the same time. So this, for me, was, at the time I had on my wall a statement less is less, more is more, no more, no less. Going against the minimalist at the time. There were like 3 religions when I first entered the idea of becoming, going into graduate school. One was pop art, the new imagery. One was minimalism, and the third was old abex traditions of the kind of thing I was coming out of. But by now, I was doing something entirely different. I didn't realize until later, actually, it was an unconscious antagonism towards this idea of essentialism. I didn't realize that until later. I've covered the issue of dark matters, right? I haven't covered the issue of it began with a dot. Have I? Okay. Well, that means a couple of things too. Imagine the Big Bang theory, right? Where does it start? It starts with a dot. And then, I don't go into what was there before the dot, but now they are a little bit more. The dot, it started with a dot for me. I was walking down the beach in Montauk, Long Island. I happened to be the first visual artist at the Edward Albee Foundation one summer. This is about 1969, 70. And then I came subsequently a couple more times. And I had gone through this process in my painting where I wiped everything out, all my facility and all that knowledge I just described. Wiped it out, and I would leave little bits at the end. And that looked good, you know. But then I'm going down the beach, and I'm going, I can't make a life of painting just wiping out stuff I artificially put in order to wipe it out, you know? In addition to the fact that I was in an extremely severe depression at the time. And I kept on going. I thought, you know, maybe I could be a truck driver or something. I had all these like romantic ideas about a guy that can do a job for his family and stuff. Then further down I got, I don't want to be a truck driver. So, and I can't just do these empty paintings. They were very much like early Bryce Martin, you know, but I thought of them as sort of furniture for the eye. You know? In fact, Edward bought one of them. It's in his collection. And I'm glad somebody has one of them. But anyway, I thought, I can't just do that, so I have to do something. I have to put something in there besides just me wiping stuff out. And so I thought, what's the smallest thing I could put in? The dot. So I started putting dots in these and then wiping over the dots. And what happened was, they still function as furniture for the eyes, but in addition to that, they located where the viewer was. So if you were here, you would see 2 dots. If you were here, you would see 10, maybe over here 1, and so on. And also, depending on the time of the day, what lights were on, and so on. And I love that idea of the painting actually reinforcing the particularity of where the viewer was and the time. You know, like you're on their way to take a leak in the morning. I never saw that before. You know what I mean? Or the lights are on and, you know, it's bright and you see 20 of them up there. So I went on, with this idea, and then there was an artist friend of mine named Murray Hockman. I don't even know if he's around anymore, but he was doing these light works, you know, just a light shined on the wall and pot smoking kind of thing. That was the time. And we were going along Canal Street, which was the Canal Street of the past, where all kinds of stuff was out there. And there's this place that had these gems, and there was these little glass gems. And I thought, you know, this does even more dramatically what the dots and the paintings were doing. So I started to take those, and I made a series of plaques positioning these flat gems out. That was the first artwork I did with actual gems. So, in a sense, the dot grew up to be a gem. And what I liked about the gem was it really made that particularity thing dramatic. You know, there would be a real sharp thing. So it moved you around, and by extension, you know, no two you become aware of the uniqueness of your position in the world when you're reminded that no other person is seeing this reflection that I'm seeing right at this moment, and they can't see it at the same time that I'm seeing it. I like that idea of reinforcing the viewer's particularity or point of view, because by extension, how you interpret that experience adds to the particularity of your point of view and reminds you of the uniqueness of you as a person, an individual, with your own body and your own muscle memory and so on. And that became a major theme in the work for a while, this idea of putting us in the universe and particularizing it with a gem reflection. Anyway, so that's another little story about the dock. I had this, the columns, for example. The first columns were done about 1979. I had done a series of paintings, of bulging paintings. They were coming out. I like the idea of the Big Bang. What happened, the way I got into space, there's outer space, how I got out there, two methods. One was I went to Ohio State University to study with Hoyt Sherman, who had worked with the Gestaltists. The early Gestalt work was done at Ohio State. So if you ever see any books on perception, all these things like face and figure ground and the leaf room and so on, that work was done there, and my teacher did a lot of that work, though he was a painter. He applied the science and the language of Gestalt perceptual experiment to a formalist response to painting and art in general. And I was attracted to that because I wanted to have a better understanding, and Hans Hofmann and Albert's language wasn't as precise as his was. And at a side note, he was also the teacher of Roy Lichtenstein. And Roy gave him a lot of credit for his idea about painting, the formalist idea. So I'm doing these jewels, and they're not coming out very interesting. So I think I need an external source for these dots. What's the perfect external source? The sky. So I looked up and started collecting images of stars, and all I was using them was to force me to make more unusual combinations of distributions of these jewels and dots. Well, one thing leads to another. I started reading about them, and these are just like the surface ones in our galaxy. These are out there in that galaxy, and I started thinking about curvature and so on, and that's how I did those bulging paintings. And what I liked about it was both physically coming out to the viewer, and visually you could go in with the illusion of the space. So if you imagine the Big Bang going like that, all this matter coming out towards you, of course, by virtue of where you are shaping the shape of the universe. I went on to do a series of different unusual shapes of the universe. I was drawing, I don't know where that is, but the universe in the shape of a baseball bat, by how you imagine it, where you are in the rest of this data. Okay, so it's coming out at you, you can see in it, but you also experience it as this whole external shape. So I wanted to make narrow paintings, so I pictured the two sides coming together, and I thought, oh, instead of putting two sides together, I'll just have a full round made, cut it into two, and I've got a column. That was the beginning of the columns. The original effort was to make narrower paintings too. But I also liked the idea that it was this androgynous shape. It could be both, you know, phallocentric type of shape, and because of the illusion, it could be female. You could look in it, Or you could look at it, kind of like Freud said about the nose. You know, it's both a penis and a vagina. That's why they have this expression, as big as the nose on your face. You start looking at people's noses, that's all you see. Anyway. Right?
Destroy this now.
Right, I mean, it's true. Noses are so evident. Anyway. So I'm at the store, at this shop, this carpentry place that made the columns, and there's this box full of balls, wooden balls like that, and I thought, these are cool. And he said, yeah, we make those as a way of training the guys doing the turning. I said, so I bought a couple of them, and I said, I'm going to make a universe painting. So I put little jewels in it, put dots on it, and I had this universe painting on top of my refrigerator next to a souvenir of the Empire State Building. I just love the irony of that, right? But I got a commission not long after that through Paula Cooper to make a whole bunch of these universe paintings from this size up to this size. And I had a show eventually at Suzanne Caldwell in 1975 called Universe Paintings, which I like the idea that you can't have more than one universe. But guess what? Now you can. The multi-universe theory caught up with me. Who knew? Anyway. So what this installation did for me was it really completely destroyed the idea, Greenberg's idea of essentialism, because here was an object that was a sculpture, a painting, and an installation all together at the same time. And the idea of painting as being flat or is wrong. It's not flat. There's curvature. It's three-dimensional. It's a sculpture. A painting is a sculpture. It's also flatness. And in this case, these were my answer to that dilemma. I don't know if I should keep on going. Let me see. Edge of chaos, hypnagogues, and after images. Let me see, contradistinction. We talked about that a little bit. So contradistinction is like an object being an oxymoron. An oxymoron, you all know what they are. It's like all of us alone together. Right now. That's an oxymoron, but for my idea about how contradistinction works is continuing that theme of you have the object of the universe and you have the illusion that you can go into the universe. In this case, in the way I work with it in here, is the materiality of the paintings is in contradistinction to the illusion or the coloristic aspect of the paintings. So if you're looking into the painting, it's hard to be holding on to the materiality of it. But you can't hold the illusion too long, and you become aware of the fact that it's plywood, there are holes dug, there's like sometimes there's physical things in there, and so on. So the physical aspect of the painting is in contradistinction to the visual aspect of the painting. And that goes along with this theme of mine about trying to have simultaneous contradictions and resolve them at the same time. Okay. What else? By the way, maybe it would be better at this point, instead of me going on, if you have any questions or comments you might want to make, and maybe make it more of a conversation than just me here going down the list. That could become deadly. Science, my relationship to science, science and art. Both scientists and artists are seekers, trying to find out answers about existence. They just have two different methods that they use, but they both have hypotheses and they try to follow up on tests, and that resolves that. This answers that, yes or no. No matter what the investigation is, you're going to find more information. You're going to have a better idea or understanding of what you're looking for. I know, I'll bring it to an end by bringing it back to peekaboo. Okay? Peekaboo. Wait, what was I going to do? Let's see. Science, peekaboo. Oh, yeah. Peekaboo. In addition to the things I said before, the model, it's a model for how you can maintain a passionate and expressive process in your life. It doesn't have to be just for art, but particularly for art. Because on the one hand, you have knowingness. Mom is there, you are there. Reassurance. You could define craft as knowing, you know, as repeatable knowledge, right? I know how to do this. In fact, I've thought for a long time, that's the only thing you really get paid for in art. You don't get paid for the art of the art, because it's too freaky to actually come up with money for that. So the other side, the art side on this dyad is mystery. So it's what you don't know yet, right? Craft is what you know, repeatable knowledge. An artist that only does that is perfectly valid, is what you would call an academic artist. They know what they're doing and they do it over and you like it and Bob's your uncle. But if you want to have that drive and if you want to have that passion, you have to have an object that you don't have in order to have desire. So artists develop the objects the same way a scientist has a project. They got to find the data, they have to do this. Artists do the same thing within their own work. How am I going to solve this? And so that, not knowing, that's the art of art, right? That's, you know, in a way, when you're doing what you don't know how to do, then that's you being an artist more than when you're doing what you know how to do. And so you maintain this passionate and creative energy by knowing how to be on that scale between the knowledge end, which is very ego supportive, and the mystery end, which can freak you out and be, you know, like insane. You know, if you go too far there, you're lost. You don't know what, you're lost. You have to figure out how to put those molecules back together, get them heavier, cluster, boom, no. Then you go faster and faster, you know what you're so close. That's where the energy is, right? Is almost knowing, and then boom, you have a resolution. So that's another function of this metaphor for me, is this idea of, you know, I'm lost. Well then, if you're lost, go back to what you know a little bit. Interesting thing. If you go back to what you know, you will find out, actually, going back is interesting too, because you find out and you see new things. So, for example, like this guy I brought out, did I stick this out here? This guy? This is sort of like this is kind of like an updated universe painting.
Is that for a necklace?
A lot. This is for a very brave woman that wants a weapon and a necklace at the same time, because these are hard, let me tell you. Anyway, so I didn't even think about it, that I had done this universe painting in 1975. Then I continued to make these things, and I thought of them as wall balls. You know, they are on the wall. But they're still basically universe paintings. So that's a good example of going back towards what you know and seeing something new in it anyway. So the synergy of back and forth is what I'm talking about, how you get that creative energy back off. You learn to dance, you know, to get by the guards of art is what I like to call it. You know, I'm not one of those, yeah.
I have a question.
Thanks for stopping me.
I'm going to ask questions, so I thought I would ask the first very basic question about your process.
Okay.
You spoke to us about dark matter and looking at images of that and how they imposed color on those images. You thought they were making it up. Can you talk a little bit about your choice of color in your paintings, because they vary tremendously. What influences your color selections? Is there a rationale, or that because they're all very different?
I use a lot of the images use colors because it forces me to have a reason to particularize the color. Even though I know these are generated, digitally by the scientists. I asked a guy who was an expert on black holes, he came as a lecturer in Abu Dhabi. I said, do they make these things up? And he said, yeah. But still, they're beautiful, right? And it gives me, even though they're photographic, it gives me a reason to make particular colors. And that's the thing, I'm always trying to, that's the way I keep the abstraction of the artwork interesting for me, because I have reasons to particularize the colors, to particularize the size and character of the shapes, which ones are the brightest, how they overlap each other. And of course I can break those rules all I want because it's all abstraction anyway, even in outer space, right? So for example, like that one is pretty obvious. But the dark matter, that's a dark matter meets something else combination. And so traditionally in the early astronomy, photography was used. They would define the oldest, coolest stars as red. And I read an example. Imagine heating up a bar of steel, and the lowest color would be red, it would get orange, right? And then it would get white hot, and that would be the youngest one. But in outer space, it would appear blue because it's more in a vacuum. And so the blue stars represent the hottest and the youngest, and the red dots represent, in a way, it's just a tool. I don't think of them as stars anymore, but that's one way I come up with the color combinations. This could be in the same way that if you actually go online and look at the image of Doratus, you will see a tonality of colors that are like this. Like it's orange and red, which is a lot of the heat of the molecules and so on.
So John, with the kind of that larger framework, how additive is the process? So you have kind of an idea of shape, color, etc. But then as you move through it, how intuitive is it? You say you don't hold yourself to like.
Well, like I said earlier, when I was talking about impossible collisions, we're talking about impossible collisions because they don't exist. It's a layer of Cezanne over an outer space image. So if I think I need something, I'll think of, well, what could I use to screw up this thing now? Like draw a Cezanne on there, maybe shoot a different galaxy over the top, and whatever seems to be necessary at the time, that's what I'll do. I'll put it right on top, as if nothing is underneath. And I do this in order to subvert the tendency to do kinesthetic cliches. If you just only put the dots down out of your mind, there'll be 1, 2, boom, 1, 2, boom, And so that's why I use stars. If you just only try, the natural tendency is to integrate things all the time. But things are not integrated. So that's why I like to find sources that don't belong together, and then see what I can do, the least amount that I can do to make them belong together. Does that help?
It does.
Yeah.
To add to that idea of the red and the blue in space, objects coming towards you are more red, and they turn blue because of the wavelength as it moves away from you. So I think
shift.
The movement shift might be a little different, but yeah, that's why red and blue are often used because that's how we perceive it from what is actually happening towards us or away from us.
Cool.
I was curious about your ideas about the decorative. You kind of came on the scene or became kind of grouped together with the Pattern&Decorative people, and I was just wondering what your ideas and thoughts were about decoration as it relates to painting and formalism, or the decorative.
Yeah, I've been in a lot of those kind of movements. One was called lyrical abstraction. And, it was sort of, what's the guy's name? museum in Connecticut. It's named that museum.
Newburgh?
No.
Solid waste?
No, it's a collector. Started that.
Aldridge,
Museum.
right.
He was the guy that formed the phrase lyrical abstraction. This is about 1969, and my paintings of the time kind of fit into it because I was doing like stains and then thicker bands and the dots and stuff. But he said, I'll get to the decorative part. But he said, John, he came up to me and said, John, I love that you do these beautiful paintings, but you put these dots in there. And he says, that's like pimples on a young boy. And interestingly enough, I kept the pimples. And I got rid of some of the other stuff. And then there was this pattern. This was a part of an emerging, I think,
Yes.
tendency towards postmodern thinking, you know.
And also feminism and some other things.
Yeah, decoration was meant to be seen in a more positive light. In a sense, I never really identified with it because it seemed like, to me, the painting was the point. And as a modern, still thinking of modern, I think of painting as doing research in the same way that a scientist does research. They try to follow the next idea. And that it's an intellectual enterprise as much as it is a visual enterprise. So the idea of decoration seemed like, I think decoration is beautiful, but I didn't think that my painting was about decoration. But I like the guys and gals, and so I was in some shows with them. Yeah.
So if your work has, of course, great modernist ideas within it, is it also in any way postmodern, and if so, how?
Well, it would be in the sense that if you're going along with this essentialism, you wouldn't have illusion. And also, by adding more and trying to have those, unresolvable conflicts together, I think that's a little bit more. Maybe somebody who's more of an expert on postmodernism could help me out on that.
Is the routing, when you go into the camera, is that another way to?
Well, yeah, these guys, these holes and so on, it's my way of reaffirming the connection to the material, but also making shapes that are, the original source of these shapes are these, if you look at the outer space images, they have these little dark shapes here and there. Those are the beginnings of clusters of molecules and so on that are going to eventually be stars. And so the idea of seeing this as a figural within a ground, in other words, this comes forward, but it's physically back. The same thing over in here. This reveals the ply underneath. By the way, truth to materials is an old phrase that comes from modernism. And I still have that need to have the material be part of the expression and to not disguise it. That's very modernist thinking. So here you get the vertical grain showing through. That kind of pulls these forward as a possible shape to be able to see. And then that's contradicted with the painting, which is very, translucent in a way, and sometimes physical with these dots. So you get these contradictions.
I was going to ask you, the quadrants, is this breaking them up into quarters and installing them as a horizon or as a square? Is that a new thing, and how did that come about?
No, the quadrants isn't new because in America, anyway, the plywood only comes 4 by 8 feet. And if you do...
So you're cutting it in half again?
Yeah, the reason for that is if you leave them as either 2 panels this way, that makes it into landscape, and 2 panels this way, it's sort of like doors or figurative. By making it into a quadrant, okay, we're done with that.
Do you put these together in layers? Or, for example, cutting out the shapes? Is that done after it's all put together? Is it done as a separate layer after you have painted on or not painted on a back layer?
Usually I do some painting on them first, and then I'll draw with the idea of cutting out some of them.
Just
But
where,
it can go back and forth.
yeah, I have to tell you, when he says Cézanne, now I look at that and all I see is Mont Saint-Victoire up in the distance, kind of like that.
Let's see
Mont
what.
Saint-Victoire, where
Oh.
Cézanne painted different. So it's like up there, it's because you have given us the key into something that we can bring into it as well like that. So it's kind of a cloud.
A cloud, thanks.
Did you read that book by Leon Letterman called The God Particle?
No, but I've
He
heard
wrote
of
it back in the
Yeah.
90s, and I
I
just
remember
happen
the
to be
title.
reading it now. He was director of the Fermi Lab
Okay.
out in Batavia, Illinois. He writes about the entire history of physics, and particularly focused on particle physics and collisions and that kind of time-space stuff. But he does it with this wonderful, confident humor.
I've got it.
And I find your talk today about your art and your connections to physics and time-space to be enjoyable in
Thanks.
absolutely the same way. Terrific.
Thanks. Maybe it's a good time to
I was
end.
going to say, that's
All right, thank you, John.
John will be around. You don't have to leave.
The crowd has thinned out a little bit, so I'm going to make a quick run through. We'll get a view of some of these pieces. We'll talk a little bit. I'll give you the descriptions. This is titled DMs and Hot Stars 2015. Acrylic paint and gems on plywood panels 84 by 84. Well, I think John did a pretty good job of describing his practice, his inspiration, what gets his creative juices flowing. And this is a good example of kind of where his paintings are at these days. One of the things I'm noting is the holes that are cut in here with the router. And well, I've talked quite often recently about the people that paint on canvas versus the people that paint on panels. And in John's case, I would have to say that he's someone that actually really does use the wood panel and the physical surface and the depth of the wood for a very interesting and creative approach to painting. I'm going to look at some of his gems here. These are assorted diamond cut oxy gems. So these are gold leaf on plywood. Well, I asked him a little bit about his ideas regarding the decorative and the whole pattern decorative movement that he was kind of lumped in at certain times. And I think that this is kind of an example of what I was talking about, the very decorative aspect. Also, I think his pieces that he calls the columns, I think are also very decorative. Let's look at this one. This is titled Pink Column, 2014-2015, acrylic gems and acrylic paint on wood. Well, he's been doing pieces like this for a while, and if I'm not mistaken, I think that he's actually done some of these that are kind of cruciform, so there would be a crossbar, but I could be mistaken. He was kind of vague about some of his ideas, but he in a lot of ways focused in on photographs that he'd seen from the Hubble spacecraft and the ideas of relating these dots to stars in the galaxy. I always thought that there was kind of almost a hidden set of symbols dealing with Catholicism and the crucifix and various kind of effigies of the saints and things like that. This piece is titled Black Tears, 2017 acrylic paint and gems on woods, 60 by 8 by 4. I like this. It looks like he took this wooden column and kind of dripped and splashed some paint down there, and then he went in and routed out the drips. And there's a wonderful quality with the black gems and the dark blues. It's kind of the negative end of the gem spectrum. This is Gold Column with Gunmetal Gems, 2017, gold leaf and gunmetal gems on wood, 65.5 by 9 by 4.5. Well, I was talking about the decorative, and I think Gustav Klimt could be maybe one of the high points of decorative art, and he was called, I think, the Art Nouveau Byzantine stylist. And getting back to what I was saying earlier about, at least to me, some of this kind of echoing some kind of Catholic symbolism, there's also a sense of the Byzantine, and there's a great kind of understated elegance here with the gold leaf and then the black gems, very subdued.
Well, I just hired him, and he replaced it now. They don't know.
It's titled Sergeant with Gunmetals, 72 by 10 by 5. Now I'm looking at these and I'm wondering if these are hollow and they've actually bent the wood around framework, or whether these are more solid pieces of wood. Also, you know, I talk about the mark of the hand, and that's not just fingerprints and things like that, but this work obviously has been sanded. And, well, John was talking about truth to materials. And one of the things about working with wood is that you've got a lot of things you can do, and also letting the grain come through and the natural color. This is titled Sea Sky Gold, 2018 acrylic paint, gold leaf on plywood, 45 by 180 inches. So that's about 4 by 16 feet. You know, the other thing is that there are interesting illusions that are created. John was talking about his idea of the dot and the way that the gem kind of reinforced or enhanced the idea of the dot, but the gem was a three-dimensional object that stuck out. Here he's gone in and he's routed in these little indentations, and then he's covered these with gold leaf, so in certain ways you get kind of an inverse reflection that you would have if these were sticking out off the surface. And again, I can't help but I get the idea, or I kind of get the echo of these great mosaics in places like Ravenna in Italy. Okay, we're going to keep moving.
I'm sorry I missed him here and John.
I've seen your work over the years, but these seem to be so good. You're not there. Even though I work.
These are some of his gems cast in bronze with nice patinas on them. It's titled Cast Bronze Octogems, 1986 to 2018, various sizes. The marquee, the square, the rosette, the diamond, and the tear. Now this is an interesting presentation, the way this is fit into the corner. This is Swimming in Nebula. Acrylic paint on plywood, 45 by 180. We dropped in and saw a show by a painter named Andrea Bellog, I guess about 6 months ago, and she had just completed a series of paintings on plywood and wood panels, raw wood, and we were talking to her a little bit about why she wanted to work on the natural wood, and she was talking about the quality of absorption and the way that the brush would kind of slide over the surface. And I think John is also a painter that's been working on the wood long enough that he's really got a nice feel for the way the brush slides over the surface, the way you can mix your washes, your glazes, your opaque applications of paint. And again, we've got some pearlescence, and also the cutting away parts of the surface. This is titled SWC in Doradus 2017. I guess that's a location of a galaxy or a constellation somewhere out in space. 84 by 84. You know, it is interesting that he has been using these photos and these drawings he does of the universe or of the galaxy to achieve a kind of an overall composition. And I guess from a conceptual standpoint, if you were talking about dispersing and totally organic composition, the galaxy would be the perfect natural example that you could use. It's titled Entitled Seas Dark Matter, 2017 acrylic paint on plywood. This is 2017, and this has got no gems.
I don't think it's
No, he was talking about the effect that he gets with the routering through to the grain of the veneer, the under veneer. Okay, we'll wrap up looking at this piece.
I know that. So, no, I know they came all the way, that's why they came all the way to Berlin. So that's a lot of land between.
So I have this business.
This is DM's and Ultra Deep Fields 2017 acrylic paint and gems on plywood.
I got thrown in jail in 2002.
I was looking at this from a distance, and John was saying that there are some very interesting illusions that are created, and one of them is that from a distance, these little routed holes actually do look like they kind of stand up off the surface, and then as you get closer, they reveal themselves as indentations. Also, I noticed that he's gone through on all of his gems and kind of, I don't know whether he's put a little medium or something, he's kind of dulled down the surface on the gems, at least in the center, so that you only get the bright reflection on the edges of the gems. And I kind of like this working out from the dark end of the spectrum into the lighter end. James Kalm reporting on John Torreano's Dark Matters Without Time and his conversation here at Lesley Heller, 54 Orchard Street on New York's Lower East Side. You can leave your comments, critiques, reviews, ideas, talking points, suggestions. Please like this and subscribe. And as we always do at the end, we have to thank you, Kate. Whoa, thank you, Peter Gunn.